Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing Adrift by Scott Galloway. I did read this on ebook, so unfortunately I won't have a cover to share with you. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go over what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I will be reading for next time. Scott Galloway is a professor at NYU. I believe he's a marketing professor. He's also very famous for being a pundit as well as being a podcaster. This book, Adrift, actually came out earlier this year in 2022. And what the book is, it's a book on Scott Galloway's take on where America is as a country in terms of social problems as well as its economic power. The book is called Adrift because he believes that since the last 40 years roughly, America has been adrift, meaning it has had a middle class that has lost a lot of its power and has several social problems that have resulted from that lack of power, as well as the income inequality that has also been exacerbated by the lack of the middle class retaining its share of wealth since roughly the Second World War. And he does this by having really short, punchy chapters that are basically 2 to 3 pages on any given topic, and then with a graph to illustrate his point. So, for instance, he talks about the share of the tech industry. Even from the last roughly 10 years, its share of GDP has gone from 6% of the gross domestic product of the United States up to 20% as of 2020. So in a very relatively short period of time, it's tripled its share of that pie. I think it's really illustrative. I think the graphs do a good job of just giving you a sense of proportion to a lot of these things. So I thought that was cool and different than a lot of these books. This definitely is in a very similar vein to The Coming of Neo-Feudalism. It has some crossovers with Of Boys and Men, which I just reviewed by Richard Reeves, as well as Civilized to Death. And all three of those I'll have below if you want to check out any of those books. He does also, what I liked about it, he does give a balanced view of America in terms of showing where America has made investments around the world and the results of those investments, which have largely been a rise out of global poverty and a rise in global education. And he also has some funny parts where he talks about, he typically, outside of this book, he mostly focuses on the tech sector. He has a podcast, I believe, with Kara Swisher that I can't recall what the name is off the top of my head. I'll see if I can find a link to that below or leave that in the comments. But he has, a lot of the book is focused on the tech industry and what he sees as the aggrandizement of a lot of tech CEOs, things such as in the filings that they have in SECs, the tech CEOs of today are much, much more prominent than they were tech CEOs in the past. He compares Bill Gates and Steve Jobs to someone like Adam Neumann, and the number of references that Adam Neumann has in his SEC filing far outweighs Bill Gates, or Steve Jobs. And he also talks about how the rise in dual stock ownership has done a lot to give extraordinary powers to these CEOs. It's typically done in tech founding CEOs, and he talks about why he thinks that's a bad thing. And he definitely has some parts that are funny where he pokes fun at tech's ability to kind of make more of itself than it really is and kind of exaggerate its claims of effect that its company or its product are going to have on the world. So I thought that was really good. The book sometimes feels like drinking out of a fire hose or like switching channels on a television. It kind of goes from one thing to another thing to another thing. It's just a lot. And I think that while I think the book is interesting, it did kind of have this choppy feel to it. And I read it on ebook, and so I basically read it all the way through. I don't know if I would have been better served to have had like a physical copy to where I could kind of turn the pages or just like sit down and kind of take it in a little bit at a time. He does give some solutions at the end of the book, and some of those fit in with the rest of the book. Some of them felt kind of out of place. One of the solutions he talks about is a one-time wealth tax, as well as investing in vocational education, something that Boys and Men, Richard Reeves has mentioned. He also talks about simplifying the tax code to make it easier for people to file taxes, as well as to eliminate some of these loopholes that benefit ultra-rich people. And he also talks about criminal justice reform a little bit, and that fell a little bit out of place. But for the most part, I did enjoy the book. I found it entertaining. If you're looking for something to give you just a snapshot of where America is. I thought this was an interesting book. A couple of the graphs I felt were maybe a little misleading. There's a part where he talks about people who enter the workforce in a recession seem to have higher job satisfaction. It wasn't quite clear to me when that job satisfaction was measured, because I know for people who graduated to the Great Recession, that isn't necessarily the case for a lot of those folks, and their incomes tend to be lower historically for people who graduate into a recession. I don't know, their job satisfaction maybe just due to the fact that they have a job when a lot of people don't have a job. So there's some of those things I had quibbles with, and he doesn't really spend a lot of time explaining. He does have a lot of notes in the back, so I could have dug in deeper if I wanted to follow up on that study in particular, and I may do that at some point. But if you're someone who has read Boys and Men, or even Dream Hoarders, or something I reviewed before, like The Coming of Neo-Feudalism, or any of the tech books that I've reviewed in the past dealing with Facebook, this will be right up your alley. I think he does a good job of being relatively punchy. He doesn't really go into super depth of all of these things. He basically gives you a topic, gives his take on it, shows you a graph to illustrate that take, and then moves on to the next topic. Some people will find that really satisfying as a way to have a jumping off point or discussion about some of these topics. And I think some people will maybe a little bit feeling a little bit like, so what? So if that sounds interesting to you, Adrift, I will say I did read this on ebook, and I found it difficult sometimes to zoom in on the charts. So I had to kind of stop what I was doing to zoom in to get the visual. So I think the ebook itself probably could have been formatted a little bit better to make it a little bit easier to read. But other than that, I enjoyed it. That's Adrift, Scott Galloway. And next time I will be reading The Devil All the Time. And I will have a link to the videos I mentioned before. If you like the video, please like the video, hit the like button, and you can subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, bye.